Welcome to the Welsh Woodman Workshop, and in tonight's video we're going to have a go at wood turning this lovely piece of Laburnum crotch into a wing style bowl. So a crotch piece then on a tree, this is where we get two branches or more branches coming off, and what I've done is I've cut down the middle with a chainsaw. That's allowed me to get rid of some of that pith. Crotch pieces are really highly prized amongst wood turners as we get a lot of unusual grain pattern as the two branches come in. So it'll be interesting to see what we get out of this piece. So I hope you really enjoyed tonight's project, and remember, if you haven't done so already, please hit the subscribe button, as that will allow me to get more content like this your way. Hope you enjoy. So I'm going to attach this to the lathe with a sort of wormwood screw. A safer way of attaching this to the lathe, I know some people will sort of turn on the lathe, where I found if you just put the spindle lock on and rotate the piece on by hand, a little bit extra time, but it's safer in terms of not catching your hands. And we want to make sure that this little gap is completely flat up against the faceplate of the wormwood screw, and that's going to give us a really strong, secure hold. A nice tight grip on this, it's not going anywhere. Obviously the larger the diameter of your work, then you need to start considering other methods of attaching. For example, like a faceplate would be more appropriate. That's on there good. Nice and flat, that's unsecure. So it's always good practice to remove any sort of loose material before you start turning. Last thing you want is these big bits coming off, flying in your face. Even if you've got a face shield on, it's not the most pleasant of experiences. So just peel them off. Takes a couple of extra minutes, but it's worth doing. It'll save you time in the long run. So it's all pretty dry, and this one was cut in the summer rather than the winter, so the bark's probably going to come off the entire thing anyway, because that cambium layer is already developed. If you cut them in the winter, I find that the bark tends to stay on, as that cambium layer of the bark hasn't fully developed. So you're more likely to keep the bark on. Okay, so we've got them spinning around pretty fast, probably around about 2000 RPMs. So I'm making sure my tool height is set towards centre. So as I come to cutting, I'm always cutting along the centre line. So I've got a Irish grind on there. So a 55-degree angle along the entire grind. And that's just going to help me to take away a lot of this material quickly. So I'm going to start off from working out from the centre. For my flute, the gouge close, I'm doing some sort of pull drag cuts. I want to try and establish a flat spot I can work from. So I'm dragging that cut round right up to the wing. As soon as the wing gets quite and level like this, I'm opening the flute up because it's safer, so you're less likely to get a catch on the wing with an open flute presenting to a lot of that airlog areas. I found that this really helps me. It's my lovely shop dog Connie then helped me out with some of the shavings and lying in a normal spot. So I'm starting to hog away material. If you look at the way I'm swinging my hips into it, that's a really good efficient way of turning. So the tool close to your body, less work on your arms, and it controls the cut a lot more. So I'm just facing off the bottom now, so I'm establishing a flat spot I can start working from to establish my shape. Again, open flute on the wing to try and really gradually bring in the shape of this nice and safely. So this is really quick, the piece is spinning. You can see with the ghosting that I'm hitting airlog a lot of the time. The faster you can turn the piece, the more contact you're going to have, especially with an irregular piece like this. So I'm just doing some push cuts now from the centre outwards to try and establish an ogee, so a traditional ogee of like this Greek style shape of the bowl. It looks quite pleasing to the eye when it's put down. So trying to blend in some of my tool marks now with the gouge, having a nice clean cut right from the bottom all the way to the rim of the bowl. And I'm going to want to do a slight undercut ready for the tenon, so when it does go down to the table, if I keep the tenon, it's going to be nice and flat. Okay, let's look how we're doing. So I'll zoom you in so we can have a look at the grain pattern. This is pretty cool on this stuff. Gorgeous stuff Laburnum is. So we've got this knot at the end, which is coming through. Well, it's probably the pith by the looks of it, because we're getting cracks and checks coming from it. So you have to be very careful. So that looks like it hadn't gone through the entire piece. Otherwise this would be too dangerous to turn, really. But stunning grain patterns coming through with these crotch pieces. So I've just got to do a little bit of work on the tenon on the bottom to make sure it's perfectly matched to my jaws. And I want to make sure it's a full sort of concentric circle on my jaws before I flip him round and remount. I'm going to do a little bit of sanding work, because obviously we're getting airlog some of the times. I've got a tiny bit of chattering. I don't know how well the camera's going to pick this up. See at these areas here, so that's not going to be good. So I'm going to need to sand that out, and I'm probably going to sand just in the direction of the grain with an orbital sander, just to get those out really quickly. But I'm quite happy with the surface. So I'm quite happy with the surface finish of the rest of it, other than that sort of wing section there. So we do a little bit of work on there. Okay, so this is probably the most important part of the turn. So I've got my jaws, so they're a Nova set of jaws, ancient ones I've had for ages. And it's really important that the little tenon we've got, we get a complete circle. So we want the jaws to be as closed as possible to create that circle profile, as that's going to give you a really strong grip. Now if we are expanding our jaws, so we bring them outwards, and the more we expand them, the less grip we're getting. I'll explain that as soon as I expand these out nice and large. So if we expand it and that was our hold, we'd only be holding it on the tiny part of the wood, so that it would be biting in these sort of sections, which isn't going to give you a strong hold, and especially with a winged bow like this, that's going to be dangerous. So the closer you can get the profile, oops, to being closed, the better. Dog, give that back. The closer you can get the profile to being closed, the better the hold is going to be. So the way I measure the sort of diameter of this is I'll set a pair of dividers up to that diameter I need, and I can accurately mark on then to my tenon. As I mark it on, I only want to make sure one point's touching, and I'll know when I've got it in the centre, as I sight down this, it'll look like both points should be touching at an equal distance. So if I'm far off, you'll notice that the points won't be touching. I hope that makes sense. I'll show you now. So trailing point only touching with one. If I go in here, I'm not at the centre. You can see they're not meeting up, whereas if I slowly come across, so I'm going to need to go down to that point. So you notice I've only touched with one point to make it safe. Touch with two, it goes bam, and you'll have a bent pair of. So I don't know how well the camera's picking that up, but we've got a little scratch mark in there that we're going to need to go back to. Now on this jaw profile, it is actually straight at 90 degrees for this one. So some of the profiles will be dovetail, so you need to try and match the profile of your jaws, and that should give you a strong grip. Hopefully you'll notice I'm creating a little shoulder where the jaws ends are going to butt up against, so I'll give you a nice location point. So that should be matching the profile of our jaws pretty well. We're going to check them out, and we can. The best thing to do is don't just take it off now and then remount it. Try and mount it as it's already on the lathe. So you notice I've got about a 3mm gap in there, so I can probably get a better fit than this. So I'm going to take a tiny bit more wood off. Any more than sort of 8mm really. Probably need to take a little bit more off in my opinion. The best fit you can get to your jaws, the better the hold is going to be. Now a great chap for someone who's really hot on this is a guy called Phil Irons. Now if you've not been turning long, I definitely recommend you check him out. He's got some fantastic wood turning work, and he's a cracking teacher as well. The next stage we're moving on to the finishing. Now I would normally use something called a cellulose sanding sealer to go over the top of this, and what that will do is it'll seal all the end grains of the wood, allow a finish to go smoothly over the top of that rather than being absorbed into the wood. Fortunately I've run out, but I'm going to be using a chestnut product called Wood Wax 22. It's a brilliant sort of wax, really easy to apply, and you get a nice finish from it. So we're going to apply this on now. You can use a paper towel to put this on, rub it in nice and evenly in the direction of the grain, and this is really going to help the grain pop. This is a stunning piece of wood. And what we can do then is use some of the friction of the lathe as it's running to buff these in. Now it's more harder on the winged areas, so I'm just going to really buff these in by hand. I find using paper towel works better than cloth, so you tend to get a little bit more friction on it. What you need to be aware of though, if you're running it with paper towel, it's probably going to disintegrate if you've got natural edge pieces like that. It's quite hard to get rid of them once they've disintegrated, so just be aware of that. So just applied the wax, going to use a heat gun to help burnish it more into the grains. So what this is doing is the heat's opening up the pores, allowing the wax to sink down to the pores. It's also darkening the grain pattern a little bit as well, which is good, so it'll help accentuate that. That'll allow me now to put another coat of wax over the top. Pretty hot, so it's going to want to sink in more. You get a nice rich colour to this. Being careful again not to get those papery bits in the bark. So I've just flipped it around the other way. I want to do my little checks. I want to make sure I've got full and free movement round. Put on the drawers, that's nice and secure in there. I'm going to set my speed down to low and gradually bring it up. Quite happy with that speed. So we're going to just hollow out the inside now. It's the easy bit. Trying to follow the outside profile the best we can. So the first thing I'm going to do is try and crew up the top nice and slowly, focusing on these wings before I take away the centre, keeping an open flute. The flute of the gouge, so this ground section, I'm going to keep it open. I'll show you the camera. So that would be presenting it to the workpiece open. That's closing the flute then as I'm rotating it. So open on the wings. So I'm going to want to keep the centre in as long as possible. I know I've got a hole in the centre anyway. That's going to help me when it comes to clearing out the centre. I want to work on the wings first before I remove the central support, otherwise it's going to vibrate too much. So I'm actually looking, rather than the tool itself, along this profile. And I can see the shape I'm getting then. If I'm just focusing on the tool that's doing the cutting, I'm going to not get a good profile. And it's taken me absolutely years to learn that trick myself, so hopefully it'll really help you out. So if you look at the top of the bowl, you can see this sort of shape progressing, so rather than looking at the tool itself, and you'll see the profile, especially in the ghosting areas at the moment. So when we see an air log a lot of the time, it'll often help you to look at that profile rather than the tool. So we're getting there slowly. So we've got a little bit more to go to get onto this piece. Our thickness is quite nice though, I like that. Okay, so what I want to do is make sure I've got a good finish on these wings before I move on to the middle. Get in there slowly. Take another pass on that, that'll look okay. So more work on the wings, again with that open flute, less chance of getting a catch, so at least that's what I've found over the time I've been turning. So as soon as I'm happy with the wall thickness, I've got it to a consistent thickness, I can start working further down into the bowl. Yeah, that's good. Okay, we can start hollowing out this sort of central part now. So you can see my body position. Working with my hips, tool close to the body. So I'm getting to that point now where my tool is getting quite blunt. That should be cutting me now. And it's not, so I'm going to need to sharpen. I'll show you quickly how I sharpen my gouges. So I'm going to be using a homemade fingernail grind jig. So if you want to see how this is made, I will do another video for that. Just let me know in the comments and I'll try and make a video of making another one of these for you. So I'm going to put my tool through. There's a little V block essentially this square section makes. I'm going to set the tool to poke it out to 2 inches because that's the little measurement I've got to get it consistent for my jig, making sure it's nice and centered with these little knobs on top. Now I've got a little platform out there, I've got a little stopper. Every time I need to reset and sharpen my tools and make sure it's to exactly the same length each time. That gives me a consistent grind each time, so I don't have to worry too much about learning how to control the tool with a different grind each time. Just going to turn them on. So I'm sharpening with a CBN wheel, carbon boron nitrate, and that gives you a nice razor edge quickly without bluing the steel. So we've got a nice sharp profile throughout now, and we can get back to bowl turning. So the funnest part of the bowl turning process now is just taking out the centre part. You can see I'm sort of got my flute slightly closed and I'm just hogging away material in the centre. And this Laburnum's pretty tough stuff to get rid of. And I'm blending in now from the centre out to the edge, so extending the length of the wall all the way along the profile of the bowl. I can just hog material away in the middle until I'm getting lower and lower. I'll take a little bit away from the edge. Again, Connie keeping me company between my legs. And we're able to just keep on going right down to the bottom. So as I'm getting deeper towards the bottom, I've turned into a curved tool rest. This just allows me to follow the profile of the bowl a little bit easier and not overhang my tool rest. Going nice and slow. So this Laburnum is rock hard. I've had this a little while now, probably left it a little bit too long to turn easily. So I'm going to be using a really valuable tool. This is something called a negative rake scraper. You can see the angle on it there, and that works really nicely on the inside of the bowl. You need to raise the tool rest a little bit so we're cutting exactly along centre. That's just going to help me clean up some of my bowl gouge areas where I tried to blend them in. Really handy tool, and you keep them nice and sharp, you get a lovely cut out of them. So just giving them a light sand again in the direction of the grain the best I can. Just going to add a wood wax 22 over the top again, just to bring out the grain pattern. Like I said earlier on, normally I'd use a sanding sealer to seal this in first, but I'm all out at the moment, so I need to wait for the shops to open again to be able to go and pop and get some. I quite like this wood wax 22. It's a hard wearing finish and it lasts a really long time, and you can also buff it up. I've had some as well that have had it so long that it's gone hard, and I use that with my buffing mops to buff things up, which works really handy. So here's the completed piece, something a little bit different from my normal sort of bowls. You can see how we've got the crotch piece there, but it looks pretty cool as it's laying down on the table with all these irregular patterns and shapes coming through. And Laburnum's got to be one of my favourite woods to turn. Looking at all the gorgeous grain coming through there, and the colour of the wood itself. On the back I've carved off the bottom, sanded it and blended it in. I've just got to use a pyrography iron to sort of put my branding and things onto it. But there we have it, something a little bit different from my normal bowls for you. So I hope you've really enjoyed tonight's video, and remember, if you haven't done so and you want to see more content like this, please subscribe to the channel by clicking the link below. Really appreciate that, and I hope to see you on future videos. Diolch yn fawr, nos da.